you want me to pick back up?
Sure, yes, we do. Yes, go right ahead. Yeah, thank you. We have Secretary Flynn with us, so we can't talk about him anymore this morning. So let's be careful. Okay, thank you.
Why not? Everybody's listening.
Well, that's true. That's true.
It's not like the old days.
Not like the old days, that's right. We can say bad things.
Right.
All right, go right ahead, Anthony. I'm sorry.
Okay, so subsection J starting on line 5 and H starting on line 17 will look very familiar. They are the same as the carry forward deployment section in section 2 and the outreach and marketing section in section 2 as well. And my guess is that Senator Kitchell, you'd like to see language for the outreach and marketing to be more combined with the administration language in this one as well.
I think so. I'm not a great one for all this duplicative or gratuitous language. It's just.
So you on page 15?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right, good, thank you.
So I will work on, much like in section 2, the combination of the administration and outreach marketing sections. I'll work on something for that here as well. Okay, you've heard mention of section 5, but this is the language that would be increasing the base MSRP for the incentive program for new PEVs. This is currently set at 40,000 MSRP, raising that to 45,000 MSRP. And that is the pool of vehicles that are available, the new vehicles under that one program.
And so that's why that chart is helpful, because you have that listed on.
What enough vehicles come under that threshold? That's right. There should be quite a few now.
Yeah, it's getting good.
There would number of vehicle choice that would fall under the 45,000.
Oh, yeah, I see that, yeah.
I never spent that much.
Me either.
Right, you have an incentive?
Yeah, well,
Well, I mean, when you buy a car for your son.
Yeah.
I had, well, he actually has an
I like
all EV.
All right,
Or is it-
okay,
Since we have the luxury of Secretary Flynn here,
yes,
may I ask a
you
question?
certainly may.
We've been circling around the e-bike reward, the $200 rebate that was in the original governor's stipend. Do you have any strong opinions on that? I'm questioning the value of it relative to the rest of the priorities.
Well, obviously, as you know, I would support the request because it was in the governor's budget. I mean, I think part of it is, will it get more people out than otherwise would get out on a regular conventional bicycle? And if that's good for health and welfare and recreation, I know is also important up in the House, so I think the money's there to support it.
There's some questions asked. I mean, I brought them up and so many others, is that it doesn't help the environment other than the health reason. That's good, right, certainly for that, but for $200, we would think it'd be better spent elsewhere. I know it's only 50,000 or whatever it starts at, but
That's a million.
Well, Senator Chittenden had actually made a good point. We were talking in the hallway. He said, well, take that $200 and add a lot more to it, and put in charging stations for bicycles, you know, in some of these places where it's at. So that's using the money. And
does it take a separate charging station for bikes? I don't know that.
what's yours take when you do it? I mean, how do you do it with a
Regular outlet,
outlet?
level one.
Yeah, so, I mean, it wouldn't.
Well, Joe wants to ride a bike from the islands to work, so I think this was.
Over that drawbridge.
I know the drop bridge. Ooh.
There we go.
No, I'm on.
All right, Anthony, let's
Side of the property.
continue on here.
Move along.
I think you'll have to do a site visit, maybe
Yes,
Senator
we are.
Barron could arrange
I want
that.
to bring everybody up there, and Secretary Flynn will bring us there, welcome us there. Well, I want to show you that bridge, the only one in the state. It's not my bridge, it's just something that has to be replaced.
I would like to go, I thought we
I'll feed you lunch too.
want to go to Middlebury.
Sure.
Yeah, I thought we,
Yeah, I want to go to Middlebury.
Show you the town.
yeah, it looks like quite
I
a.
can't wait to cut that ribbon on that train, I'll tell you that. I've been waiting for that for 20 years. Okay, Anthony, we got sidetracked, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Mask it.
Quite all right.
Section 7.
So Section C is now deleted. You heard testimony on this section from Cindy Locke. This was the 1 million for equipment and the 50,000 for enforcement that would be going through the Department of Motor Vehicles for VAST. That was something that House Appropriations decided not to appropriate the money for. So to have the two bills align, this section is deleted in the T bill now.
They must be understood.
They are, and Cindy Locke has emailed me wanting to testify in appropriations, and we don't take so if this committee wants to hear.
Did we do this last year or no?
No,
So
the
one-
governor's office apparently solicited proposals, and this was one. I think we got
She
a.
was in here, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought.
And she was talking about the equipment. So
Yeah, of the groomers, right?
it
Yeah,
was
because they
groomers
got-
and
yeah,
50,000 for law enforcement.
Oh, that's what it was, that's right, yeah.
So-
So the House took it out. Okay.
Yeah,
House Appropriations took it. Did it come out of the committee, Transportation Committee in?
House Appropriations took it out through their report on the T bill and did not appropriate the money in the big bill.
so they kept in the e-bike, million.
Why would the appropriation get involved in that? I just wondered about that.
Because you have to appropriate the money.
Oh, no, I.
Also, it's general fund, not T fund.
Oh, it's general fund, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. All right,
Or rather, in the governor's recommend, it was general fund.
okay, yeah, I didn't realize that, sorry.
So the question for us, I need to get back to Cindy, she probably is
What do you want to do?
listening.
You want to have her back
Well,
in or?
this committee is supposed to be the one that's, and then we'll see what we have for general fund. So this is,
So we'll put a check mark right now beside it.
and I
revisit.
don't think you want to, anything that to do with the e-recreation, if you want to move that or change the amount on e-bikes. My feeling is that there is a strong emphasis that money should all be kept in that climate action arena. This would be more support of that sector, recreational sector, of groomers and law enforcement, and that would have to be considered. This would require finding.
So what would their budget be on law enforcement presently?
Oh, well,
It's like 100,000 or is it
well, they get a certain amount from the registrations, and then we do a $35,000 direct appropriation to the, there's a Southern Task Force, a snowmobile task force. So that's,
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, and I guess because we're online, for the record, Joe Flynn. My understanding was at least the 50,000 portion of that amount was intended to be directed toward Fish and Wildlife for increased warden presence on the trails.
Oh, wardens on the trails?
Right, oh, yes.
yeah, they are.
So even though it was put together as one number going through VAST, the enforcement piece was intended to be directed right at Fish and Wildlife for warden.
Oh, I don't think, I think I
It's
missed
$1
it.
million, so 50,000 would be a small part of that.
Correct.
No, the groomers were, but the other thing is, state police also do trail enforcement.
I thought-
No,
It is 50,000 for law enforcement.
Yeah,
$1
but
million for the.
But you're saying the governor's proposal was all to go to Fish and Wildlife, none to public safety then?
Well, no, but I think again, I'm not trying to speak for either commissioner of those other two departments, but this is just information that I have, but the recreational enforcement on the part of the state police is in the state police budget. This was a $50,000 directed expenditure toward Fish and Wildlife to augment they being on the trails as well, which they are. So both of those law enforcement entities patrol trails.
But it didn't say that here, though. It said law enforcement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You should, and frankly, that should be confirmed if you wanted with Fish and Wildlife. I don't mean to speak for them, but that's
Okay,
my
no.
understanding.
I didn't know they were on the trail.
Would be obviously Commissioner Harris.
Yeah.
It seems like Cindy Locke, when she was in, gave us a copy of their proposal, which,
All right.
um,
Go ahead.
So both of these, I connected back to the e-bikes thing, and this also just Senator Ingles, and I hope I'm not making a redundant point that's already been made, but I feel much more comfortable with $1 million for snowmobiles and $1 million for e-bikes. E-bikes really focus on the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, remote locations, so that they can charge their snowmobiles at the same places where in the summertime they can charge their e-bikes. That's where I think a smarter focus of our limited state dollars are, rather than giving the money out. Or in the snowmobile thing, she said, yeah, it might be used for some electrical infrastructure, but I would like to actually direct it to having and supporting remote electric charging stations for both snowmobiles, bikes, and any grooming equipment.
Well, a lot goes with it. I mean, whether it gets back into the budget or not, a lot goes into what we were talking earlier about, okay, it's recreation, it's going. So put them where the people are parking their vehicles and their snow machine trailers so they can charge while they're out and about. I mean, it just doesn't have to go for a groomer that's electric. I mean, it can serve the people who are coming up using the trails.
We're not gonna settle that today, I understand, I think, so we'll have to have more discussion about that, so we'll just put it.
Well, we have two things, one of which is, right now, the budget as passed through the House does not include any of the money that was going to VAST. This is the groomers and the law enforcement. They did keep in the incentives, but then we're saying, is that where we want to put that investment, and where is the long-term benefit from it? So that's going to be the issue, and of course the House would have used the money for other things other than groomers and law enforcement. My question ultimately is we've taken testimony from Cindy, we've had a copy of their proposal. Does this committee wish to take additional testimony on the groomers and the law enforcement? Or do you feel that we've done it and we'll just have to let it go through the appropriation process?
I think we're having a lot of questions as we go through this, and I don't mind if somebody wants to come in and give their one last pitch, but let's do it after we've gone through this, and then line everybody up that wants to come in and give it one last shot before we.
I think we
Before
owe
we
it to
muddy the
them. I think
waters.
we owe it to them.
That's all I want. That's right. I don't have any problem with that, the sequencing. I'm just saying I've gotten the request because of appropriations, but I have to
They should have a
say
fair shot
this
at it.
committee has got to be the forum for
Did you have
that.
a snow machine, don't you now? or-
I'm lucky to even have a room to ride on.
Well, no, you're on that, you're ahead of that committee, so you're the person. Okay, let's move on, thank you.
Okay, so now we're getting to sections 7 and 8, they go together. And this is our first instance in the T-bill where you are seeing something in the text of the T-bill that is amending the agency's proposed transportation program. This idea to use the money, federal funds for 100% for construction of certain town highway bridge projects did not originate with House Transportation. It originated with the Agency of Transportation, and the timing of it, it wasn't able to be in the light book or in the first iteration of the T-bill. It was something that the guidance was not available until House Transportation had already started to work on the project. What section 7?
The agency, but the House did include it.
Yes, the House did include it as the agency proposed it with no changes. What section 7 does is it lays out in subsection A some findings that are linked to what the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, makes available in terms of additional federal funds that can be used in the Bridge Formula Program for fiscal years 2022 through 2026, and then there's the tail that it can be spent on. It says that the Bridge Formula Program funds are to be used for the preservation and replacement of bridges. As part of the Bridge Formula Program, states are required to allocate a minimum of 15% of the funding to address off-system bridges, that's off the highway network, where off-system bridges are those that are located along roadways off the federal aid system. In Vermont, those off-system bridges are primarily owned and maintained by municipalities. And under the IIJA, the federal share of funding for those bridge projects can be at 100%, as opposed to the standard, which is 80 federal, and then the 20% non-federal is split 10% state, 10% municipality. So that's just the findings linking to what the IIJA is now making available to the states for federal funds. Subsection B lays out the priority.
More than a finding though, number 3 is really not a, well, I wouldn't call it a finding. It's a requirement to allocate a minimum of 15%. And so with 15% of the, how much does that come to? Who's got a good calculator? 22, or
34
what, 33, some odd,
34.
million?
That's the federal requirement.
Yeah,
That's the minimum.
So those bridges would be what kinds of bridges? It'd be on a town system, on a, okay.
so are we talking, is the federal, are we talking about bridge formula program? It's a federal program? Okay, that's, so we are doing a finding here. You're just referencing what are the requirements that come with that federal formula program. All right, thank you for the clarification.
In off-system, and Thea, do you want to give me a quick definition of off-system bridges?
Off-system are going to be those that are located along roadways that are not on the federal aid system.
The town highways, like,
So not state aid, federal aid.
that would be like 207, that we are, extension 207 would be one of the,
I think is eligible for federal aid at this point, so that would not qualify.
that wouldn't qualify. Oh, okay.
It's more like your bridges and culverts that are, you know, on class 3 or roads typically, you know, they're really off system.
That's a big number, that's that's helpful.
If I may,
Go ahead.
also, really one of the agency's primary focuses with this new funding source, because this is brand new to us, it's $225 million, it's a general fund from Congress, so it's an entirely new bridge program. And within the component that requires a minimum of 15% to be sent at 100% to towns, we propose to direct that at historic bridges and covered bridges. There was an MOU between the agency and between ACCD, and I believe a third party, which I've forgotten at the moment, penned back in 1998, that said, paraphrasing, we really need to protect the sustainability of Vermont's historic bridges. This is part of the iconic look of Vermont. Candidly, those candidate bridges really never risen through the prioritization process because of greater need on other networks. So the Highway Division saw this opportunity with this new funding program through 2JA and thought that this could be, those bridges could be target samples. And I believe that there are 40 or so at this moment that have been identified. Now, you know, clearly a local community would have to agree to say, sure, we would like this bridge done, but it would be at no cost to the community for construction. There could be some small cost for engineering, or if a piece of right of way was, you know, so there'd still be the split for everything other than the actual physical construction of the bridge. But this was thought to be a way to get Vermont caught up on a commitment that it made to itself in 1998, but hasn't really found the money yet to fund.
You were here in 1998, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
You remember that provision?
We are.
Yeah.
It's not about every year since.
Keeping you up at night, hasn't it?
I've been worried
Check
about
that
it.
box, finally.
Oh,
So the 34 million, basically, you've got some identifications of bridges that could go to, and
Correct. We've actually identified more bridges. In other words, we've identified an amount greater than the 34 million.
right.
All right, off the top of my head, I wouldn't want to say something incorrectly, but the percentage that I've seen on the draft of the number of bridges we would recommend towns agree with us to fix brings that percentage somewhere up in the 30 or 40%, much more than what we would be required to do.
Right.
This is an opportunity to really jumpstart the completion of something that we've been unable to do.
Right, that's a good place to spend one-time money over there.
Yeah, it is, it is. Yeah,
So out of 40, well, like, Linden has got, I don't know how many, they've got the most.
Several.
Well, yeah. they've got-
Montgomery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this isn't just covered bridges. There are certain steel engineered bridges that are on the historic bridge list as well. But, you know, so
So
these.
there's floods of 27 bridges out there as well. that are-
Yeah.
Don't pick on my drawbridge, because I don't have a covered bridge.
So out of the 40 bridges identified, how many municipalities that are gonna, I mean, this is another way that municipalities are getting.
No, that's a great question, and we have that information. I don't know if I can
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah, I can get that for you. We
Okay,
provided that to House
Because,
Transportation.
you know, the other thing is, under ARPA, 176 million went out directly to municipalities. And every town except Searsburg, I believe, there was only one town in the entire state that did not apply for those funds. So that 176 million is a fairly significant amount of money. And that was when we got the RTCs and the league. We put funding in to help the towns, you know, apply and make sure they were spending the money, you know, in appropriate ways. But some counties around the country just didn't take the money because they felt it was more than they wanted to deal with, or the accounting or the requirements. So I think the towns really felt that giving them that additional support was really critical, but it's pretty impressive. Only one town did not apply.
Yeah.
And a relatively small one at that.
Okay, yes, go right ahead.
The other thing I would just note about this program is we are using our regular prioritization process
Right.
to figure out which bridges are gonna come first, second, third,
Yeah.
in terms of programming the projects. And so we're trying not to deviate from standard practice,
Right.
but we are creating this category of bridges for special attention that would not otherwise be able to rise to the top in prioritization.
I'm happy that you guys are that far down the process with that, and, yeah, I'd be very.
Anybody
very curious to see
covered
that.
bridges, you got your district, I'm sure.
Oh, I have a couple, yeah.
The question is, this is what you're proposing. Do we have actually other options that we wouldn't know about it unless we are reading the federal legislation? In other words, could this money be used for other bridges than what you're recommending here? So are you making a policy choice to say, we'll do these, but what other bridges are being excluded or not? So
So
So I was saying, I think the answer is yes and yes. You know, yes, other local bridges could be done, but what we don't have a choice on is not spending at least 15% on off-network bridges. That is a mandate.
yeah, I got
So
that.
once that mandate is out, then what you identify as off-system bridges and what might be the targets is where the choice comes in.
But we could do off-system bridges that are not truss or covered. That's my question.
That's correct.
And I think one other little clarification here is, we're also including all of the town highway off-system bridges that are in the FY '23 program. So we were able to cover all the covered bridges and truss bridges, historic truss bridges, and then there was still some capacity, and so we brought in everything that was in the FY '23 program that fit the category.
As, it was said earlier, it's not 100% free. It is as far as the bridge construction, but there's still other works that need to be done, and the town has to free up some money. And there might be some towns that would be, hey, that's great, we'd like to do that, but we just don't have the money to get us to that point.
Correct.
Or could they use some of their ARPA funding?
I don't think they can use their ARPA funding.
Not as the match, but to supplement.
Only if they can use the revenue replacement exemption, or, you know, get creative as your committee is very honed at doing with swapping funding sources around.
We try to be. So when we get to the plan, which bridges in the '23 plan are you said you had enough to fund them. So what, how many bridges in that '23 plan were you able to fund through this infrastructure bill?
So I don't have the exact number at the top of my head, but I will bring the list of all of them so that you can actually see which
That would be
bridges
helpful.
are.
It would be, yep, be interesting.
I think they actually did give us that when they
Yeah.
went through, but it was part of that, all that There's just so much information, we didn't have the context.
Was it, that's true, in the plan, but it would have identified it as the infrastructure would be the funding force.
Yeah, Kevin Marshy came in maybe a month ago, and he talked about this specific program and had a presentation about it that probably included those lists. So I'll get those refreshed and maybe take your handout for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think.
They're all Grand Isle, you said?
Green color.
Couldn't hear you with your mask.
I used to hear you. Okay, go right ahead, Anthea.
Okay, so much of subsection B has been talked about already. This is the 2 tiers of priority implementation that run in parallel with one another. Subdivision 1, these are the bridges that are eligible and are in the fiscal year 2023 transportation program for town highway bridges. And the criteria is that they were not authorized for federal funds for the construction phase of the pending project prior to the fiscal year 2023 transportation program, because that would be predating the IIJA, and are either listed as a front of book project or a development and evaluation project in the fiscal year 2023 transportation program. You won't see a list of those projects in the transportation bill, but you will in the next section see what the project switching to this 100% federal for construction frees up in terms of transportation fund money and the local match money. Subdivision B says, and we've talked about this already, that this is only for the construction phase at 100% federal, and that the engineering and right-of-way phases of projects shall continue to be funded at 80% federal, 10% state, and 10% municipal. So that's one of the priority tiers of implementation. The second priority tier of implementation are the historic trust, the historic covered bridges, and the historic trust bridges. And that has similar language to the prior subdivision about how the engineering and right-of-way are still at the 80, 10, 10. And then you heard Michelle talk about how the elevation of projects to what comes first, second, third, et cetera, is still to be done under the process outlined in statute in 19 VSA section 10GL. What you will see in the next section of the bill in section 8 is the list of bridges for both the covered bridges and the historic trust that are being elevated to the candidate list and will then be moving forward. So you get an idea of what sort of the queue is on this. And then subsection C, this gives your secondary implementation. If there is still funding available, and it sounds like there probably isn't based on how many bridges are going to be covered by this, then it just defaults to town highway bridges advancing under the prioritization in statute. And then subsection D repeals this on October 1, 2029, which is the conclusion of the authorized implementation period for the IIJA. Section 8, this is where you are going to see, oh, I apologize. I said you wouldn't see the list of the bridges. You do see the list of the bridges. So these are the bridges that are in the Town Highway Bridges program for fiscal year 2023 that will be funded under that prioritization at 100% federal for construction. So Clarendon, Hartford, Ludlow Village, Pulteney, Stowe, 2 bridges in Stowe, and then 2 statewide projects that have to do, I believe, with painting and rehabilitation of covered bridges and the historic trust bridges. Subsection B, this is where you're getting how much money is freed up. So when we have these charts, just as a reminder, the first portion of the chart, that's the authorized expenditure divided out into categories, other, PE, right-of-way construction. And then the second portion of the chart is what the source of funds is. So in the first part of the chart, you will see that there are no changes because this isn't adding additional bridges or changing what's being done for the bridges, it's changing the funding source. In the second portion of the chart, you'll see that an additional almost $1.3 million is going to be coming from federal, and that frees up your 10% state and your 10% local. And someone else in the room can refresh my memory on why there's the $100,000 difference. I believe there was a different funding split for local under one of the allowances in statute. But this is freeing up almost $700,000 in transportation fund dollars that we'll then see how that is proposed to be spent by the House in the balance of the bill. But to recap, you've got in section 7, the priority implementation and your findings. And then this first portion of section 8 is dealing with the first of those 2 priority implementation tiers, the projects that are already in the fiscal year 2023 transportation program proposed that can be eligible for this 100% construction. Subsection C and subsection D are going to be adding bridges to the candidate list for that other priority implementation criteria. Subsection C are going to be the covered bridges, and you'll see a listing of 10 bridges there. And subsection D is going to be the metal truss bridges, and there are 9 bridges there. So those are the ones that are elevated to the candidate list.
Yeah, wow, total covered bridges.
Around 100.
Really that many?
Maybe.
Wow, wow. Right.
So we brought on 19 more bridges as a result of this federal funding between the 2 categories of covered bridges and truss bridges, 19.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Of those 102, do you know how many are actually still used to allow vehicles to cross over certain areas as opposed to like the westward one, which is just there as a declaration?
I don't, but I can find that out if you'd like.
But do we prioritize it all based on whether or not they're still used, transportation network as opposed to just an amenity?
I suspect we probably do, but I'd have to check on that
I
also.
would assume it wouldn't be eligible if vehicles didn't cross it.
Yeah, and also we don't typically fund off-system bridges. That would be a local cost, so.
There's one in Lindenville up at the north end of Route 5.
Yeah, right there, yeah.
Yeah, which is off the road.
Right.
And there's another one down near Linden Corner,
Yeah.
which, so there are 2 in Linden
That's right.
that are not part of,
That's right.
that are not part of the trial.
We have one in Irisburg I'm aware of.
We don't want to march to.
Yeah, you know, Martin Bridge.
But the one in Westford, still a lot of bicyclists, walkers, but you're saying.
Same with the one in March.
Okay.
It could be, but those are off-system bridges, so it'd be the municipality's responsibility.
they got it pretty expensive to repair, I'm sure, because you need all the historical issues.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may just jump in to sort of answer a question that Anthea brought up. I just wanted to clarify that the 6 bridges you see on page 20, those are the 6 projects that were in the White Book for a construction activity plan in FY23. This obviously doesn't represent the full universe of projects that will be in the pipeline funded through this funding stream in the next 2 years. But this is just the sampling of the projects that are in the book with construction activity plan this year that would be shifted.
Yeah,
And-
it saved almost 700,000 T-fund that you must have spent somewhere else.
The other body sure did, Madam Chair, and we can talk about that tomorrow, but that's a good segue. That the reason why on page 21, which Anthea alluded to, the reason why the state and the local numbers in savings have a $100,000 discrepancy between them. Normally you'd think they'd be the same if everything's going from 80, 10, 10 to 100%. The reason why there's a discrepancy there is one of those bridges, the Hartford Bridge, is planned to be funded 80, 15, 5. And it had $1 million worth of construction activity planned for FY23. So that's why you see that $100,000 discrepancy, is because the state was already planning to pick up $100,000 more of the cost of that project than it would under 80, 10, 10. It's because my understanding is that project is enrolled in the accelerated program that allows the state, the towns to have a lower match.
Which one was it, Hartford?
Hartford.
Okay. Well, now we know where the 100,000 is coming from.
Okay, Anthea?
Do you want to continue?
Sure.
Okay. So now we are getting to some of the other changes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, we've been here a week.
I apologize. We're boring you.
No, it just seems like.
What page are you on, Anthea?
I am on the bottom of page 22, section 9.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now we're getting to the other changes in the transportation program as proposed by the administration. The first one is reducing operating expenses in program development by $54,211. And I'm going to talk about the next one since they go together. And section 10 is increasing the amount that goes out in grants for town highway aid by that same $54,211 amount. And both of these are transportation fund dollars. This is because the town highway aid amount, and that's the pot of money that's distributed to the municipalities based on length of mileage by class, that statutory amount is calculated based on the CPIU and an escalation from the prior year. And there was just, based on the timing when the calculation was done, the town highway aid amount that was included in the administration's transportation program and the governor's recommend was short by $54,211. And this is where the agency is suggesting money can be moved around to maintain the statutory amount that is supposed to be going out in town highway aid. So they are proposing this swap of $54,211 coming from program development operating expenses and going to town highway aid that goes out in the grants to municipalities. And I know Chris has said how much that works out to municipalities. So it is a small amount to each municipality, basically.
$200 per town on average.
But we are pure, so adhering to that. So this is something you recommended, just the switch to keep to that.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Thea, this is the one in the past, section 10, town highway aid, that we have not withstood that.
Yep.
Right? And
Yep,
then
so
remind me what we did last year. And then, so this year we are following the statute. We're
Yeah.
not.
So you've actually followed it for the last 2 years. When it's not followed, you'll see in the big bill in section E 915, notwithstanding language. Last year, it stayed at the level amount from the prior year, and that had to do with how the escalation is calculated under statute and the reduction in the prior year. So no notwithstanding language last year. And then the year before, there was notwithstanding language because there was a one-time bump that went out to municipalities and town highway aid when there was a pause in the class 2 roadway and the structures program. And that was sort of one of the administration's proposals that the General Assembly agreed with in terms of supporting municipalities in the early portion of COVID. So there was a notwithstanding 2 T-bills ago, no notwithstanding last year. And if you have sections 9 and 10 in the T-bill, there will not need to be a notwithstanding section in the big bill. And Chris has made sure that the appropriation numbers in the B sections of the big bill align with this swap.
And is the statute just from the prior year, or is it like a several year?
It's the prior 2 years, the prior 2 completed years, I believe.
And regardless of whether it was not withstood or there was a bump.
Exactly. So what the language that was included in the year that you had the bump, it said this one-time bump shall not be included in the escalation for future years for the statutory calculation.
And the House agreed with that.
The House agreed with maintaining the statutory amount. I know the House frequently wants to put more money towards town highway aid, but this
That's
is
why I'm asking.
Yeah, they are not going above in this iteration of the T-bill what is required by statute.
Okay.
Okay, so section 11 actually relates to section 2, that $6.25 million that's going for the level 3 chargers. You'll remember when I was talking about the funding source split there, it was 2 million ARPA and then 4.25 coming from the NEVI money, the money that's available for charging stations. You'll sometimes hear talked about the 21 million that Vermont is getting through the IIJA for charging stations, with the 80% federal and 20% non-federal. Again, just given the timing, the administration did not program in that 80% federal to make that 4.25 million. This is adding it in. So it will be just under 3.4 million. The administration says that they already had the capacity within policy and planning to cover the 20% non-federal match. And then this is just making it so that there is the increased authorization for policy and planning to cover that 4.25 million. And like all of the changes that are made in this section of the T-bill, the B sections in the big bill have been changed accordingly.
Questions? No? Okay.
Okay, so it's just reflecting those federal funds that came in after the bill was developed. And you want that spending authority?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so sections 12 and sections 13 relate to changes that you made in statute through the T-bill last year, where you increased the minimum amount that needs to go out in the grants for town highway structures and the Class 2 roadway program. And the amounts that are reflected here, the as proposed, is under what the statutory amount is. This is bringing it up to what statute says it should be based on changes that were made in the T-bill last year. So you'll see town highway structures increasing by $866,500 for grants, the source being T funds, and for town highway class roadway increasing by $951,250. Again, transportation fund to bring it up to the statutory amount for both of those programs.
Refresh our memory what we did last year.
You increased the minimums. I can't remember what they were prior to last year, but I can certainly pull it up by getting the last T-bill. But you increased Class 2 roadway to, there needs to be 8.6 million that goes out in it and 7.2 million for the structure. So you just increased the amount that is supposed to go out in those grant programs. And to refresh the committee's memory, these are the ones that sort of go on a 3-year cycle. There's a matching requirement that's in the, I believe it's in the orange book for both of them. That's the guide to municipalities. And then one of the minimum grant amount award or maximum grant amount awards is in statute for one of the programs, but not for the other, but they always sort of track each other. And I believe last year there was also a change in what the maximum grant award amount is for one of the programs, the one that hasn't specified. But when we finish here today, I will just pull those 2 sections from the T-bill last year so everyone can remember what was done by General Assembly.
And did we do that because we paused that during COVID? We didn't fund that, and that was, that's how we ended up putting $3 million back into the towns as well to spend in the one-time thing to catch them up. And
that's a really good question. What the administration proposed for the T-bill last year was not to make a change to statute, but to have an increased one-time amount that was going to these 2 programs to make up and then some for the pause that had been done during COVID. But what the House Transportation Committee did and what the Senate agreed to was, in addition to that one-time bump, making up and then some for the pause, to also say, and going forward, the amount that needs to go out under these programs needs to be increased. So to the extent that you're kind of tracking what has happened, pause, unpause, increase plus, and then going forward more than the amounts that were required to go out prior to the pause.
So the increase, is there a formula like CPI, or do we just give an absolute dollar amount?
It is just a dollar amount in statute that does not increase like town.
What part of the conference committee on the Senate that gave everything away to the House?
In fiscal 21, we paused those 2 programs totally. In fiscal 22, we brought them back and we doubled them to make up for the pause. And then the legislature in 22 also added 3 million to the formula program above what the formula or what the statute calls for. What the governor's recommended budget this year for 23 did was take the roadway and the structures program and put them back to pre-pause levels, if you will. It just restored them, and also did not reflect the grant and aid program that had the $3 million one-time. Because last year, the way it was written, it was a one-time $3 million for the formula program. So the formula program this year reflects what it should be without that one-time last year, and the structures in the roadway program reflect what they should be prior to us pausing and then doubling. So
And to Senator Kitchell's point, the towns are hollering that we cut them $3 million.
They're gonna be disappointed next year because there's gonna be some.
Right.
I mean, they think this train, gravy train is gonna go on forever. It's not gonna happen.
You know, I'm sure perhaps some towns look at that, but when you look at the total budget,
Right.
all the money going to Vermont towns is higher than it was last
You're
year.
still up 2.4% over last year. So, yes. So that's where I pointed out, say, hey, you don't get lost in the numbers, look at what your increase is and your 2.4%.
We gave everything away to the House, but we'll see what the appropriation bill gives the House this year.
You know, last year with
Police
the,
cars and stuff like that, we'll see.
with the doubling of those two buckets and the additional 3 million last year, our total expenditures to Vermont towns was just under $80 million. It was 79 point something million. And in this as recommended budget, that number is 81 million there, even though that 3 million one time.
Right.
Everybody knew it was one time, but of course they couldn't look at that as
They don't
that.
understand that. Yes.
So Senator Mazza, also reflecting on the fact that our chief financial officer was cognizant of the new statutory levels, but was considering the carry forward amount that was available when building the budget. So in other words, the 951 is what's remaining in carry forward. When you add that with the as proposed, you get to the 8.6. And the House was not in agreement with that methodology.
Just the accounting, the way that you guys did it.
Okay. All right, go right ahead.
Okay, so you have, and this will be so much more obvious when you've got Chris's spreadsheets and he's walking you through it, but I will simplify it to say you have, through earlier sections, freed up transportation fund dollars, but you have already required more transportation fund dollars than you freed up, and you're not done yet. And we'll be getting to where there are two more additional uses of transportation fund dollars that deviate from the administration's proposal. House Transportation and the House is proposing that the amount that is needed to cover the increase in transportation fund expenditures comes from highway maintenance, and that changes in section 14, where you'll see a reduction in operating expenses by just over $3 million, and that is coming from state transportation fund dollars. The other two pieces that, and I'm just going to skip 14A for a second. The other two pieces.
The House proposed it. This is not anything you proposed.
Correct.
They went there to find money to do other
They
things.
took $3 million to do other things out of maintenance.
And you don't support
Absolutely not.
taking it out of
Not
maintenance.
at all.
Okay.
So just to finish the conversation, you can talk about the details more. The other two things that they're proposing to spend the money on is an additional $500,000 for the MTI, the Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program. And I know you heard about this yesterday, an additional $1.4 million to maintain zero fare public transit on the urban routes, excluding the Link Express route. So the additional areas that the House is proposing to use transportation fund dollars that deviates from the administration's recommend is zero fare on most routes, the increased $500,000 for MTI, the town highway structures, and the class 2 roadway. And those added up, and pulling out the transportation fund dollars that's freed up through the class, the off-system bridges piece, that almost $700,000, that's where you get this $3 million reduction to maintenance. And that is the end of the changes that are being made to how transportation fund dollars are proposed to be spent by the House as it deviates from the proposed transportation program. The last change to the proposed transportation program originated with House appropriations, and that had to do with how the $20,250,000 DMV core system modernization phase 2 project would be paid for. And the governor's recommend that was to be paid for with transportation fund dollars, and that $20,250,000 is the amount that would be freed up if you stopped the JTALK appropriation. House appropriations did not end the statutory appropriation there. It maintains the transfer of the $20,250,000 from the T fund to the Department of Public Safety. And then House Appropriations is paying for this project with ARPA money. And because this is referenced in the proposed transportation program, it is the very last tab, one-time appropriations. What this is doing is decreasing all of the $20,250,000 that the proposed transportation program had being transportation funds, and instead making it $0. And because the House Appropriations iteration of the big bill has the money not flowing through the Department of Motor Vehicles, but instead going to the Agency of Digital Services, it's just leaving a note there to preserve the thread saying, yes, it looks like this project is not being funded. However, the fiscal year 2023 budget bill appropriates this $20,250,000 from the ARPA state fiscal recovery funds, and it's going to the Agency of Digital Services. This note will need to change. This page will need to be changed if the Senate version of the big bill deviates from having the $20,250,000, one, be a source other than transportation fund dollars, and two, go in a way other than to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And that's it. You made it through your changes to the transportation program.
The other appropriation we did for the DMV modernization, did that go to digital services as well?
No, we did not. And
So
that
what
was
is, why are we doing it?
that was a choice made by the House.
Yeah, we didn't.
Okay, because normally I think the appropriation for IT projects goes to the agency.
Right.
So, okay. Obviously that 20 million transfer, you'll fund it, but then of course the longer term plan is what should be that transfer of JTOP money. And then of course there's that car language that the state leaves there. We talked about.
So,
But the House budget would not work if that we didn't do this. It would be
we will have further
a
discussion.
$20 million general fund.
Okay, we'll get back to that then. Next, go ahead, Anthea.
So now we have basically made it through the language that you hadn't seen prior. Oh, I do want to spend one more bit on zero fare. In addition to the 1.4 million that would be going to have zero fare for the urban routes that are not Link Express, there's also a report required. I know you're going to love that one. On or before January 31st, 2023, the Agency of Transportation needs to file a written report with the two transportation committees showing changes in public transit ridership by county and type of service in fiscal years all of 2020, 2021, and 2022, and the first half of fiscal year 2023. And that report needs to estimate the amount of funding needed to continue to provide zero fare service on both rural and urban, and broken out by county and type of service in fiscal year 2024. So setting up, coming in January, the information that you would need if there was a desire to continue to fund zero fare public transit.
So I caught a GMT commissioner in the hallway just a little while ago about this exact piece, and they're very appreciative and supportive of funding to keep zero fare, but they also said that they are hearing more concerns about reducing their routes. And one thing he suggested that, and I like that we are enabling Link Expresses to continue to collect fares, but if we could include some flexibility in this so that as the board, the GMT board, which I have full confidence in, they're 13 very bright individuals with lots of in-depth experience. If with this language we're more flexible, that it's for zero fare public, but if it also translates to them wanting to charge on some routes in order to maintain service levels, I would support some flexibility in this funding so as to encourage and target zero fare, but still enabling them to, if they need to start charging on some lake-like routes that go up to Jericho or so on, that they could do so in order to maintain or increase service levels.
But that even presumes you're willing to ding at some level the maintenance budget to do exactly that.
Okay.
They got to charge money on the fares, that's for sure.
Because that's how they're doing it, it's by reducing the maintenance budget to 3 million. So what you're proposing would actually help that, being on the maintenance budget.
Well, sure, I think you're saying leave it at the 1.4, but allow for more flexibility using it for zero fare and or route maintenance.
Right,
So you would still want to spend it, it's just how you spend it.
giving them some
Our
flexibility.
official request would be for the 3 million to be restored to maintenance. Just so that our position is clear.
Yes, go ahead.
Anthea, can you go run down that 3 million maintenance, how they spent it again? It was the 1.4 for the zero fare, 500 for the MTI, and what was the Route 2?
The other two are the structures and the Class 2 roadway. So the additional 951,000 for Town Highway Class 2 roadway in Section 13, and the additional 866,500 in Section 12 for Town Highway structures. And that adds up to like 3.7 million, I think. And then there's the 689,000 that is freed up in Section 8 for the swap in funding sources for the town highway bridges that are in the transportation program. And I can put that in an email, just in a little blurb form. I have it written out because I needed to keep track of it for the summary document. But when you hear from Chris and he goes through like the transportation on a page and some of the other documents, I think it's much easier to see, you know, on one page, not when you're having to flip through 10 pages of bill text to see where all the changes are.
Yeah, Terry Flynn?
Obviously, I look at this from a particular perspective, but Anthea was correct. But the way I hear that is these are towns that are already getting ARPA money to historic levels. We've said here today that we would like to send $86 million in 100% bridge money to them as well. Yet the other committee wishes to cut maintenance to add yet more money. And understandably that's the process. But at some point, where does someone want us to cut maintenance? Because we're constantly hearing about road conditions and we all understand that, whether it's pavement condition, bridge conditions, or snow and ice control. There just has to be pragmatic realities. And I say this only because this is a moment in time when there are historic levels already being proposed by this administration to those two very programs that the House recommends cutting maintenance for to bump up by another $900,000.
So you're saying, in essence, reducing current level to increase another area of spending.
Correct, an area of spending that we didn't.
Which the towns are already getting a good shot.
I think
Right.
we are, I mean, collectively.
Bigger than ever. Yes.
Similar question on the maintenance budget. I can't remember what happened, or I guess we just deal with it in the next fiscal year when the maintenance budget is below the budgets. Like this year, it seemed like from the last report we got, you're not likely to spend the budget. So what?
We are likely to have, we're likely to have some savings in snow and ice control, but of course we have to go through the whole 12 months to understand all of the maintenance that we do.
You gotta fix the pothole.
Right.
And that's what you do. You just put it in other, if you have those savings in snow and ice, you move it to some other.
There you go.
Correct. And what we typically do is we typically, you know, starting about this time of year, we look at what do we think we're having for savings in snow and ice control. And then we talk to the districts all over the state of Vermont and we say, what sort of district leveling can we do? We had a lot of residents in Isle of Mont last year complaining about Route 129. We were able to pave that. We had residents rightfully complaining about Route 11 from Derby through Morgan.
Now, that's not just based on who's complaining.
No, but the district leveling, my point is district leveling are projects that aren't necessarily, they're not in the white book. And we can navigate quickly and drop in and take care of real serious need in areas, which just gets us through a point in time. We did like $800,000 out on Route 2 3 years ago.
Right.
And so that's the type of thing we do when we have some savings. It's part of the way the agency has operated forever. That is the bucket of money that allows us flexibility to do previously unprioritized
Beyond winter maintenance.
Bill means,
Beyond
right, beyond winter
Winter
maintenance,
maintenance,
which is
some
all
years,
part of.
I've seen some years they go up a million more,
So-
other years down.
In essence, what we're doing is compromising or degrading the ability to, for the conditions of the most heavily traveled part of our transportation network and moving it to the lesser traveled local roads.
Well,
Maybe.
the House proposal is moving it to transit and some other things.
Well,
that-
no, but I'm just looking at, a roadway and
Right.
structures.
Request to.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, we've got to
Which
switch
is
gears.
1.8 million of the 3, but the balance is for the other 2.
It's 11:30, we have to switch gears. We have the mayor of Burlington, I think, going to join us this morning. Is that correct? At 11:30? Okay, and Thea, well, thank you very much, and we'll continue our discussion tomorrow, I believe. So,
See you tomorrow.
appreciate it. Are you going to switch this to the mayor?
Senator Mazza, I have been told that Mayor Weinberger is in another meeting until 11:30 sharp, but he is supposed to join you.
Okay, well, we'll have a minute here to get ready.
On that last topic, I'd love to come back to it as we go forward, just to better understand some other options, maybe get the money back in the maintenance budget, or at least, I'm just hearing from GMT that they'd rather restore services, so their providers rather restore services than have sheriff police.
That's what Andy heard too.
We can move around, but I personally, that maintenance, guys, I know how backlog we are. We are helping the town greatly this year, which is great. On the other hand, they have an obligation to do roads. That isn't just winter maintenance. That's where people get confused.
Well, then, those 2 sections, we just go back to the agency recommend, but that's 1.8 of the 3 that's being cut.
Yep, everybody wants a piece of action. I understand. But they're getting good pieces this year.
Certainly are.
But one could always use more.
They're winners or losers.
And it's like Alice in Wonderland, all shall be winners and all shall have prizes. That's the way it seems like. But the requests are insatiable. But this is something you have to negotiate with the House every year, and that is the extent to which you support the secondary transportation infrastructure versus the statewide infrastructure that supports really the, economic and the high volume of travel.
Isn't that we're not giving them money this year? I mean, man, look at the money.
So it's just a matter of choices.
One town called me, said, how am I gonna spend this money? I mean, come on.
You're talking about-
They called me and I said, well, that's, how am I gonna spend it all? Well, guess it's too much.
Well, no, they can do capital improvement, they could do weatherization, there's
But some of
tremendous.
them, it's a big chunk of money, they haven't planned on it, and bang, they got it, now they gotta figure out how to spend it.
Well, that's where the league and the RPs will help them.
The town's actually got a lot more flexibility than the state
Yes,
has on that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, they have.
They did
Mayor
with the 100.
Weinberger,
That $1 billion exemption, yeah, that's, there's a few towns that budget's bigger than that.
He's here.
Okay, we'll get, but one more minute, I got a couple of members, okay. I'm returning,
There he is.
the senator from Chittenden is just coming in, so.
Senator Pursley. How are you, Mayor Weinberger?
I am good. How are you all?
Well, hanging in there. You still having fun there in Burlington or what?
We,
Tough day.
Senator, absolutely. A lot of good stuff happening here.
All right, I guess it's all yours. I think you've probably heard some of our discussions. And would you like to comment on them?
I do appreciate the opportunity to be with you and share some thoughts and answer any questions you have, and very much appreciate the invitation to participate. So I guess where I'd like to start is I did hear as it was happening and then read some of the summaries of your discussion on March 9th. And I would like to start by addressing the current financial and programmatic health of the airport, because I do think there were some elements of that discussion that suggested the airport was currently in turmoil, and I think there was that was a word that was used, and there was a sort of general tenor of the session that implied there was something perhaps lacking about the city's management of the important regional asset that is the Burlington International Airport. Here, I'd like to make two strong points in contrast to that. The airport is currently in a strong financial position despite the incredible historic challenges of the last couple of years. This was affirmed just this month by the two independent credit rating agencies that evaluate the Burlington International Airport. Both of them gave the airport a stable outlook and noted the positive strategic steps that the airport had taken to manage the uncertainty and the volatility of the pandemic. Also, already in 2022, the airport has completed a negotiation and executed a major new agreement with the rental car agencies, which are an important part of the finances at the airport, and that has locked in stable revenues for years to come, and supported the creation of an important new rental car service center. So while we had a very public and unfortunate leadership change at the airport, I think it's important for everyone to understand that the airport is much bigger than any one person, and the positive performance at the airport has continued through this period. This is typical of the airport's performance over the last decade, in which we have seen repeated credit rating upgrades, the stabilization of the airport's finances through the negotiation of a major risk-sharing agreement with the airlines that serve the Burlington International Airport, the expansion of direct routes with larger mainline carriers and aircraft, and the addition of a huge number of amenities for the traveling public. If you think about what the airport is now versus what it was a decade ago, it's a very different place. This decade of performance is in line with most of the airport's 100-year history under the governance of the city of Burlington. The city of Burlington has grown the airport from an initial 72 acres to almost 942 acres. Prior to the pandemic, the airport was serving 1.4 million passengers a year and contributing more than $480 million a year to the regional economy, approximately 3,500 jobs. I would hope that the committee would agree that there have been few comparably successful economic development efforts by state or local governments in the history of the state over the last 100 years. There was a rough period, which was referenced in the conversation you had on March 9th. It was an anomalous period. During the time you heard from Mr. Worthen when he was in leadership in that period, we did have a tough time. We took on too much debt. We mismanaged the expansion of the airport garage, and both credit rating agencies dramatically downgraded the airport during that time. Moody's actually downgraded the airport all the way to junk bond status. From my perspective, the way in which the airport recovered from that very challenging period speaks to the strength of the current model. The Advisory Airport Commission, which I served on for 9 years before moving into this role, where I've now served another 10. So I've been involved with the airport for 19 years now in a management role or a leadership role of sorts. And that the Airport Commission, I've been referred to as an advisory airport commission, which is technically accurate. But I think when people just think of it as an advisory commission, I think it often understates the importance and the very significant role that commission plays. And the commissioners were the first to raise alarms about what was going on at the airport. And when it was clear that we had problems because of the current system, it was also clear who's accountable for fixing the problems at the airport. Ultimately, it is the mayor's job the buck stops with the mayor. It's the mayor's job to make the airport work. And I ran for this office in large part because of the problems that I'd seen as a commissioner. And I made major commitments during that first campaign that I would turn around the airport. And I've been very focused on making good on that commitment for the last decade. The invitation that I received from Senator Chittenden to appear before you today cites a statement, a bullet point in a PowerPoint presentation that was created about a year after I took office, which said that the airport should work with state and other potential regional partners to explore a regional authority model to be implemented as financial goals are realized. And further, Senator Chittenden's note indicated that the bill that I believe you have been reviewing, and I think maybe now you're considering adding to a budget bill, H52, is intended to act on that recommendation from this 9-year-old report. I just want to make sure that as you consider that, which I fully respect and have some specific thoughts on, which I'll get to momentarily, but I just want to make sure that that it's clear where that recommendation came from and what has already happened with that recommendation before this moment. That presentation was created by a committee that I created as one of my first acts as mayor, trying to make good on that campaign commitment. I set up this committee, and it was a great committee. They produced a lot of good work that was represented in that presentation. And all of the recommendations in that report, which was from 2013, took about a year of committee work to create it. All the recommendations served as a roadmap for the turnaround of the last decade. And we could go through each of those recommendations, and I'm confident that all of them were followed up on and implemented in some form. And that included the recommendation to work with regional partners. We did reach out after that recommendation was made to the state and nearby municipalities. And at the time when the airport was suffering and in a tough place, and there was questions about its future stability, there was not a lot of interest from other municipalities in participating financially in the challenges that we faced at the airport. It was a time when there was a large amount of short-term debt that it wasn't clear how it was going to be retired. It was debt that had been taken on to create that garage that there was not a plan to address, and there was concern about financially what we were facing. We went out and we fixed those problems on our own, but we didn't ignore or stop thinking about the idea of regionalization, especially as the issue continued to come up, and it's come up throughout my time in this role, and it's come up in prior decades. And several years ago, I directed the city attorney's office to conduct a detailed study of the history of the airport and to research the many questions about regionalization, to essentially study this question of regionalization. And I believe the committee may be familiar with the report. I'm unclear how familiar you are with this report. I know it's been shared previously. I want you to know that I directed the city attorney's office to take a very even-handed approach to this effort. We did not go into it with preconceived notions about what the study should find. One of the city employees who was involved in that effort, now she was in the city attorney's office at the time. She's now works for the legislature, and I would hope, I would hope she would confirm that. As someone who had been involved in the airport for so long and seen it go through good times and bad, I wanted to know if there was clearly a better way to govern the airport than the one that we were using. And so the city attorney's office worked on the report for over a year, and they issued it on January 1st, 2020. Here, I would like to just take a moment to share some of the major findings of the report. One, there has been a substantial investment into and in support of the airport by Burlington taxpayers since it was dedicated, and that support continues in important ways to this day. That is a point that had been questioned and that I was not, that the history had not been clear about. That is now well documented in this report. And there was a great deal of investment in the first 30 years. The direct investment doesn't happen now, but the city of Burlington continues to offer full faith and credit backstops to the airport's debt pledges. And so I just think it's an important thing to understand. Second major point, while the details of the governance models vary, the Burlington International Airport's current governance structure, which is a municipal department within a general government entity operating, as a separately reported enterprise fund. This model is a widely accepted and reasonable governance model, squarely within the range of municipally owned models adopted by approximately half of the airports in the country. Almost all of these municipally owned and operated airports were founded by the municipality and have remained in municipal ownership throughout their history, with the exception that some of them were taken over by the federal government during wartime. A third point, all airport governance models, and there are other models. This one that I just described only accounts for about half of them. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and studies of their effectiveness generally have not suggested that there is one superior model of airport governance that constitutes best practice. There are just too many kind of differences among airports to generalize a single best model. Fourth point, typically airports have maintained the ownership and the operational governance with which they were founded. And there's a really good reason for that. Changing models has a very high cost to it. Transferring ownership, governance, or operations away would entail significant transition issues, including transition of staffing, assumption of current debt. We have substantial amounts of debt at the airport, the transfer of employee pension obligations, ownership of assets, Federal Aviation Administration Authority questions. There would just be many, many details that would have to be worked through. And that leads to sort of the next point. Because of the high cost of change, changes to ownership and operational governance tend to only occur, and they occasionally do occur, for really compelling reasons. Usually because an airport is failing or is in need of considerable investment and improvement that it can't provide. Sixth major point, the sponsor of the airport and the holder of the airport certificate from the FAA, which is a key document, because the federal government puts so many millions of dollars into the national aviation system. Burlington is that sponsor and is responsible for determining the airport's governance and operations. And the point of that is that, and there's been litigation that has happened, for example, with the Charlotte Douglas Airport, is that any change that even the state might want to make to the way in which the airport is owned or governed would likely require the concurrence, the agreement of the city of Burlington for a change to take place. So, and a final point, and then I just want to speak specifically to the idea of a study. The final point is something that the report really urged us to consider, is that there are ways often, and this has been found in other national examples, that do not require the disruption and the complete restructuring that a governance or ownership change requires for concerns, for regional concerns or economic concerns to be addressed. I would say one example that we have just done together is the charter change, which has added a Winooski seat to the Burlington Airport Commission. And there could well be other changes like that, short of a total government overhaul that might address some of the concerns that exist out there. So let me just close and then with several points, and happy to take questions, of course. I would just, maybe my overarching point is we put a lot of effort into this study. It's about 50 pages long. I hope that it will be reviewed carefully and considered before any new study is undertaken. Certainly it was not an independent study. It was the one done by city staff, and there may well be justification for doing an independent one. But while not independent, it was something that is detailed and a lot of effort went into, and I hope it's viewed carefully. It will consume taxpayer resources and considerable staff time from the Agency of Transportation and employees at the airport to do another study. And so I just think we should get the full value out of the one that's already been created. Secondly, the proposed airport study committee that I see in the draft bill, I don't believe has appropriate representation for the city of Burlington and the airport. Again, because the city of Burlington is the founder, owner, and the manager of the airport and the sponsor in the view of the FAA, its governance is very unlikely to be changeable without the city's consent. And thus, if the committee's goal is to collaborate to explore change and improvement, I would ask you to consider treating the city of Burlington as a full partner, not simply one of many stakeholders. Perhaps that could mean working within the framework of the bill that the city would have, instead of just one seat on this committee, half of the seats. Finally, I would just ask that the committee respectfully consider whether there's another path to progress other than commissioning another governance report. Here, I just want.
Oh, we lost you.
Questions?
Yeah. Jeannie, can you get him back on?
Well, he has to re-enter the waiting room.
Okay.
I got a lot of points, just questions, but I don't want to keep us here through lunch.
I know, I have a lot of questions. We'll be here till 12, so that was it. So we'll have to return. We're at another
Well,
time.
it sounds like he's in agreement to stay in conversation, which is very encouraging.
It's got their attention.
Anything another seat in Burlington, I'm completely fine with too. Sorry.
This is the bill, or we're talking about it?
They're just talking about it.
Where's the bill he's talking about?
Sheet 52 is the original language that we were taught that Anthea recrafted into possible amendment to the T-bill. And I recognize the report that Anthea was involved with that he's speaking to, and I do agree that it was one-sided and not independent. And I just don't think it focused on the possible benefits to the city of Burlington.
Right. Well, that's what I wanted to ask. You said taxpayers are involved. What do you mean? You're not investing money without returning it. I mean, that's fine. I understand that. But if it was a good investment, they would put it up.
And recognizing, if he's watching this later on, they have done phenomenal things. The airport is in great financial status.
But it is a big airport now. It's a state airport.
Yeah, and sometimes the animal gets so big that you just don't have the qualifications to run it. You just don't. You don't. I mean, I think that's one of the things that was brought very clear. And I understand I can't remember the gentleman's name, Worthen. I understand that maybe some of his points are a little bit biased, but he made some very good points of how to properly bring people in to manage something as big as what it
Jeannie, can you
is.
hear us?
I can't hear you.
Maybe we'll have to reschedule. It's getting late to noon time. There's going to be a lot of questions, so perhaps we can reschedule at a later time.
Okay,
Sure.
I'll see if I can move things around tomorrow if he's available.
Well, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. I mean, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. It could be next week. I just think we're going to spend a lot more time on this subject. We haven't had a chance to ask questions. He hasn't finished. So I think today we're 5 minutes away. We have to be on the floor at 1 o'clock. So why don't we just, courtesy, we'll have him back and we'll end this conversation this morning.
Okay. Do you want me to stop the live stream?